So a public-private partnership is a funding model that's used by the government where they partner with the private sector for infrastructural development. They get into a deal where, for example...
She said deal. Sorry.
It's a deal, basically. It's a business deal. Or what the government needs to check when they're getting into such type of arrangements is what is the ROI, the return on investment for this thing.
Part of the problem with the Kenyan government is just the sheer lack of transparency.
It's just that private sector bridges the funding gap. Yes. And what we are saying in this episode is the government needs to be transparent in how they are getting into these deals.
Hi guys, welcome to the Rundown. My name is Mihala Barasa.
And I'm Dani Nzyuko.
The year is off to an amazing start. And today, we're going to handle something called public-private partnerships, or otherwise called PPPs.
AKA Mambo ya Adani.
AKA Mambo ya Adani na Ketrako na airport.
And whatnot. And everything in between.
And everything in between. Hapo ndipo tuko leo.
Yeah.
So welcome so much to our channel. I think a good place to start would be, what is a public-private partnership?
So a public-private partnership is a funding model that's used by the government where they partner with the private sector for infrastructural development. So because sometimes the government might not have all the required capital to be able to build a road or to do an energy project or any like capital intensive development project. So they partner with a private company. A lot of times they partner with private equity firms who then raise funds from investors, and then they get into a deal where, for example...
She said deal. Sorry.
It's a deal, basically. It's a business deal where the private company runs that project, implements the project. So they do the infrastructural development, and then probably they collect the revenue for a certain number of years from that project to pay themselves back and their investors for the funding of it. And then once they pay, then now after that number of years that was agreed with the government, then the project or that infrastructure is handed over back to the government. Yes, so it's basically a business deal.
It's a business deal
between the government and private investors.
And when you're looking at PPPs, the other question that came top of mind for me is this something that is a reserve of the national government, or are county governments allowed to enter into PPPs?
Wow, that is a good question. So as it stands currently, there is a directorate for PPPs under the National Treasury. So currently our governance structure in Kenya is county governments might not be able to borrow funding or get into deals that have an impact on the overall economy of the country, like getting into debt by themselves without the approval of the national government. So they would still have to go through that directorate.
Okay.
So they can do infrastructural projects using the PPP model, but they would still have to go through that directorate and the National Treasury. Okay.
Yeah. I like that answer. So maybe we can go to maybe the types of PPPs that are available or that maybe governments can get into in Kenya. I don't know if you want to start us off, or I should...
maybe you can take that one.
Okay. So there are different types of PPPs that governments and private investors get into. The first one is, we could call it the build, operate, and transfer. So this is where the investor will finance, build, maintain and operate a facility for a given period of time,
Yes.
and then they get their investment back, and then they transfer the property back to the government after a concession period. Exactly what she has described. Then there's build, own, operate. This is where the private investor will finance, build, and operate the project, and there will be no transfer back to the government. Basically, the government sells you out. Ding, ding.
It's fully owned by the private
Fully
sector.
owned by the private sector. The other one is called build, own, operate, transfer. So this is where the private investment firm or company or the private sector will build, then they will own it for a certain period of time.
Yes.
Then they'll operate it for a certain period of time and eventually transfer that project to the government after an agreed period of time. So there'll be after some time they're like, okay, now you can get back your investment. Then there's build, transfer, operate. I liked this one. This is where the private organization will finance and build the project, and after completion, they transfer the ownership of it to the government.
Yeah.
After they've already transferred it to the government, the public sector or the government leases it back to them, and they'll be under a long-term lease. So during the term of the lease, the private developer will operate it and see to it that it works well and probably earn some money from it. And this can be for a long or a shorter period of time, depending on what the government wants. Remember, this is now a government or public sector owned property.
Yes.
And then the last one that I researched on is design, build, finance, operate. So this one, the private sector is responsible for, they'll design the project, they'll finance it, they'll construct it and operate the project, and they will be compensated for services that are associated with that project. So those are some of the types of PPPs that are available, or models that are available for PPPs across the world. Yeah.
So I think the thing to note about this is the company that is getting into a deal with the government will usually do evaluation of the project. So the government will do evaluation, the company will also do evaluation. And that's where the negotiation comes in. Because the government and the private entity will determine how much that project is going to cost. And if it's an income generating type of infrastructure, how long will it take to pay itself back? And that is what determines, for example, for the ones where the private entity is going to run that particular infrastructure, it determines how long
The concession period is going to be.
Yes. So how long will it take to get back their money and earn some interest from it? Yeah.
And I don't know how our PPP contracts are structured, but do you think it would be a viable option for a government maybe to shorten the period or lengthen the period? And what do you think would be like economically viable reasons maybe for lengthening or shortening the period?
Okay. Actually, PPP models are good because it means that where the government has a deficit in terms of infrastructural development, instead of going to borrow from institutions that would probably give them a very high interest rate, then they can be able to build that infrastructure now, and then the private sector is going to generate its own income to pay for that thing. Okay, so it's normally a viable option, especially for very capital-intensive infrastructural development. What you need to check, or what the government needs to check when they're getting into such type of arrangements, is what is the ROI, the return on investment for this thing. So if it's a project that is going to expand the economy further, then it's good. One of the projects that was done during the Kibaki time using PPP was the Thika Superhighway. Yes. So the Thika Superhighway, when it was built, it really connected Nairobi with, or improved the connection and the commuting time between Nairobi and Central.
Central, yeah.
Yes, Central Province. So that, I think, was a viable one. And when there is no corruption involved, because the problem we have in African countries is we normally want a kickback from
the deals.
Yes. So if we actually do clean, straight deals, it's actually a really good model. Yes. And if there's transparency in the process, I think
Even better.
Even better. It's actually a very good way because also the private sector, a lot of times you will find these companies have good professionals. They hire proper professionals to do these projects. They have quality assurance in place. They have controls when they're doing these projects. So it actually makes sure that you come up, once the project is done, there's quality.
There's quality.
Yes.
And you get to benefit from actual expertise because this is someone that is pouring a lot of money into a project that is probably for a government.
Exactly. And like sometimes when the government has given contracts maybe to build a road to just some engineering firm and they don't even come to check the standards, of that road. 2 years down the line, the road has potholes. You'll probably find the ones that have been built through these PPPs, they have done them according to the standard that is required. Because if it's a road, they are going to be collecting toll fees. They want to make sure that is a good road.
It's a good road,
that people are going to actually use so that they can collect their money. Yeah. So when we say it's actually a business deal, it is a business.
It's supposed to be a proper business deal. Ding, 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 government. It's supposed to be a proper business deal. I think the other thing that when I was researching, I saw PPPs are able to do, just apart from getting the expertise from the private sector, it's also, sometimes it's not really that the government might not have the money. They might have the money, but they might want to use it to do other things. Yeah. So this kind of helps,
frees up
comes
the budget.
Frees up the budget for that money to be used for other things. Unfortunately, in Kenya, those other things are probably not.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's a big
like the time when the story that always kills me in Kenya is the Eurobond story. When the government is asked what happened to the money, it was absorbed in the. I'm like, seriously, you can't tell us where that much number of billions went? Eh? You can't do for us.
But I think the problem with please don't abduct us. Part of the problem with the Kenyan government is just the sheer lack of transparency.
Yes.
Because we saw even with Adani, one of the main things that the public was saying is publicize the contract.
Yes.
Let us see the details of this contract. Let's see where each dollar, each cent, each shilling is going to.
Yes.
Let's allow us to know what this deal is about.
Because if we're going to let some private company run our airport,
yes,
for that number of years.
Was it 30 years?
Yes.
Yes. And it was only 30 years because the concession period under the PPP Act is 30 years. Yes. Had it been longer, I promise you, it would probably have been a longer time.
Yes.
I think that was one of the things that plagues Kenya is the sheer lack of transparency. Because after some of this information was publicized and when the issue went to court, then it came out clearly that even the economists that were looking at it were basically saying, this is not a profitable model for us. There's nothing much in it for Kenyans. I am a lawyer. I do not have that level of expertise, but even the engineers, the technical people in Kenya were just like, yeah, this does not look like a good deal. And that then begs the question, like we were saying, what then could be the place of public participation in PPPs or deals that involve the public or structures and things that are supposed to benefit the public and money that probably is supposed to at some point be taken from the locals. What is the place of public participation and how does that then affect the larger scheme of these projects? Because what people were saying is if this information was publicized and we were allowed to look at the ins and outs of the project, let alone the due diligence and who this person was, just the viability of the project, we had looked at it and we had said, you know what, this is not something that is viable for the country. Probably then we would not have gotten to a place where the government was so rude about everything and they were going really into the signing of it. And please note, this issue is not over. Just the other day, I think they went to, I can't remember when they went to court. I think this issue was in court very recently. And the judge was like, you know what? You said this deal has been cancelled. Bring proof, because we know what you people have been doing.
Yeah.
The president went and said, oh, it's been cancelled. We are no longer going on with it. It is fine. Come this January, they're supposed to go to court with proof showing that, yes, indeed, the Adani deal with the airport was cancelled. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
Do you think they'll give proof?
Nope, I doubt it.
Da, da, da.
So the other area that we probably need to look at, and a lot of Kenyans had been asking this, is there any legal or regulatory framework that's governing PPPs in Kenya?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yes.
So initially, I think pre-2013, there was no real viable law that was governing PPPs, but there was a policy. There was a policy that would guide how PPPs are entered into. That's not to say before that there were no PPPs. I just think the level of risk involved was not as much. But in 2013, they published the first Public-Private Partnership Act. That's the Public-Private Partnership Acts of 2013. And this was basically to help improve the infrastructure in the country. And why was infrastructure important? We remember during the Kibaki government and coming up, one of the things that the government really put its muscle up on, and the Uhuru government, was to improve the infrastructure around the country. And I think that is what now brought in the need for the PPP Act. Now, after 2013, this act was I don't want to say repealed. Repealed is the wrong word. Let me just say improved. This act was improved in 2021. And the way the act was improved in 2021 was because we have been getting into PPPs from 2013, there was some lessons and key learnings and best practices that had been learned over that period of time. And those lessons needed to be incorporated into the 2021 Act. So those are the PPP Act now, the one for 2021, is the main legislation that addresses the public-private partnerships. Yeah.
Okay. I think following that, there was also a regulation that came in 2014, which is also called the Public-Private Partnership Regulations, which now goes into more detail on how the private-public partnerships work, more like a guideline. You know, a law is normally very general. Then the regulation gives more details, yes, on how things are going to work step by step. And besides these two, there are also other acts of parliament that guide how PPPs are entered into. So they also have to be compliant with the Public Procurement Act. And they also have to be compliant with the Public Finance Management Act and also the Infrastructure Act. Yes, because as we had mentioned when we were starting the episode, PPPs mainly come into play because of financing infrastructural development. So they have to be compliant with the Infrastructure Act. All right, so the next area that we probably need to look into is what were the issues that Kenyans raised about PPPs? Because the Adani deal was I think the first deal that
was very publicized.
Yes, and people were like, "What is this? Who are these guys?
Who are these people?"
Yeah, and we've touched on it. The first issue was transparency. People wanted to know this deal that that they're getting into. What is it about? Because we know that one of the biggest risks right now in the digital age is misinformation. So, of course, there were people who are saying wanauza
airport. Yeah, that was actually the biggest one. Like, exactly. They're selling the airport.
They're selling the airport. So what does that mean? When and that's where we say civic education is not working in Kenya. Not. And one thing the government shoots itself in the foot about is lack of civic education. And I really wonder who does PR for you people. Anyway. If you are clear and open with what you're doing, it actually reduces doubt and reduces that risk of misinformation to the public. Yeah. The other question that was there was due diligence. How was the due diligence done?
Yeah.
You know, because now when the billionaire, the founder, who from Adani is found to have engaged in fraud in another country, then you ask yourself, was due diligence
Who did
done?
the due diligence?
Exactly.
And how was it done?
And how is it done? Because when you're onboarding someone, there are checks that you have to do. Simple. Know your customer checks.
Even our employers surely do a background check.
I know. So you want to tell us a whole government didn't know who they're getting into business with? Yeah. The other thing was the cost of the projects. The projects that Adani was supposed to fund, was that cost actually correct? The valuation. Had the valuations been done correctly, or had the costs been inflated? And I think that's one of the things that also gets into transparency, where they need to say, this is how we did the valuation of this project, and this is why we are saying this project is going to cost
worth this
much.
much. Yes.
Another issue is, was it compliant with the Public Procurement Act? Did we do competitive bidding or sourcing? You know, were there other companies that brought their bids, that did their proposals and said, us, we can build for you guys a world-class airport like the one in Qatar
for lesser?
You know, hey, come on. Anyway, yeah. Qatar Airlines, please sponsor us for a trip this year.
we will shoot from your airport. An episode there.
Yeah. Ooh, yes. So if there were companies that actually came and also had, if there was competitive bidding, that's the other question that people were raising. So basically what we're saying, all these things all boil down to transparency. And accountability. If companies normally have dashboards to show, this is the amount of revenue we generated this year, this is how much we have spent on these projects, this is how much we have paid our staff, this is how much we paid for office space. You want to tell me a whole government cannot do such things?
And you see, let's even pack even the dashboards. There are financial records that are usually required by KRA.
Yes.
Filing of returns, profit and loss accounts.
Yes.
All these things we are giving to you and telling you, me, my small business, for 200 shillings a month, this is how I performed.
Yes.
Surely for a big government project, you can't put that in a website somewhere.
You know, and that is why I'm asking, who does PR for you guys? Anyway. So those were some of the issues that were raised by Kenyans when the Adani deal came out. Yes, and we can see that there's clearly people didn't know what PPPs are. And also guys didn't know that there are several projects that have been funded through PPPs. Yes. So it's not necessarily that an infrastructure is being sold to the private sector. It's just that private sector bridges the funding gap. Yes. And what we are saying in this episode is the government needs to be transparent in how they are getting into these deals.
So there's two things that stood out to me in the new PPP Act of 2021, which essentially I said I didn't want to use the word repealed, but which repealed the 2013 Act.
Yes.
So the two things that stood out to me is, one, the concession period was capped to 30 years. So the government and a private entity cannot have a concession period of more than 30 years after the project has been completed. That is a good thing, because that means that a private investor or a private sector firm cannot own Kenyan property for quote unquote own or be in a perpetual lease over Kenyan or a public property for more than 30 years. The other one that really stood out to me is, once you've been allowed or given the mandate to begin the project, most of those projects are mandated to have started within the first 12 months. So we can't give you the contract and then 18 months down the line, you have not done anything. And I think this kind of helps with delays. Like we need the airport, we need the airport urgently. Why are you taking 2 years to prepare yourself to come and build the airport? I think those are two of the things that the new PPP Act kind of looked like they were putting a turning point on, turning point to in the new act. The other thing that people were asking about is then what happened to contracts that are already ongoing. I think we all know that a law does not apply retrospectively, so those projects, of course, are set to be completed according to the terms of the agreements that that Kenya and those private firms had entered into. Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. Thanks for that. A law does not apply retrospectively. Did you guys know that? All right. That's good to know. There's a question then I have for you after the episode. All right. So just as we wrap up the episode, some of the projects that were funded previously using this method. One, of course, the most famous one is the expressway.
Expressway.
Yes. That is why you're paying toll fees. Although sometimes I feel like tunachezwa. 500 end to end. Guys, hey.
Kwani, where were you going? What don't I know?
See, I need to use it to go to Shag.
Oh, okay. I thought she had bought land in Syokimau when she was not telling me.
No, like if you get in at the, for example, at the Wayaki Way entrance, then you go all the way and come out at Mlolongo.
Okay.
The full way.
I'm okay. I thought you had done something.
Don't worry. If I go nini, tukienda kujenga huko I'll tell you.
Tutaenda? Okay.
Lazima nikuite ground breaking.
Please.
The other project was you remember the KPLC last mile project?
Yeah, is it in Coast?
Yeah?
Is it in Coast?
No, it was in different
locations.
Okay. Especially they were mainly focusing in rural areas.
Oh, last mile project.
Yeah, last mile project.
Sorry.
Yes.
I was thinking about the Lamport one. Sorry.
The Lapset one. No. Okay. Although that's also one of them.
The
Lamu Port is also one that is being funded using the PPP model. Even you remember Lake Turkana wind power project?
Did it ever end?
That's a good question. Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's some.
Remember it, but I didn't.
When you check the national grid, there's some power that comes from
it.
That's fine. Then also currently there's a project by the Nairobi County, the Nairobi Commuter Rail Project. Yes, that's also being funded using PPP. So to answer your question, you had asked a question earlier as we were starting, whether county governments can get into PPP projects. Yes.
You cannot trust Sakaja. Anyway.
Is your country.
Anyway.
The dimples.
Mr. Dimples.
Mr. Dimples.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. But anyway, that's where I think sometimes we need to separate politicians and people who actually know
what to do.
The technical aspect.
Technocrats.
Yeah, because sometimes these politicians get us into funny deals.
They show us shaggy.
But as we said, please don't abduct us. Yeah, we really tried to just. We were just educating people on what PPPs are.
Yeah, but anyway, tujaguza mrima. We finished the list.
Yes, no, those are the ones that I wanted to highlight because those are the ones that people actually know a lot about. Yeah, some of the ones that have been done, I don't think a lot of people know them. But these were actually some of the ones that had been done. So a lot of what has been done is on roads, energy. Yes.
It's basically infrastructure.
Yes. Yeah.
I think there's also something on
transport and energy.
Energy. There's also something on
health.
No, health. Yes.
Yes.
And real estate.
Oh.
I think part of affordable housing is being financed through a PPP. Yes. I think it's Ngara or something. That's a topic for another day. But I think the housing sector is one of the projects that that are being financed through a PPP. I don't know how that is going to look like, but yeah.
Good to know.
Yes.
Okay. With all the money we are being deducted.
So you should know that PPPs are not only limited to Adani and Adani, I mean Ketrako and the airport. There's much more that is being worked on behind the scenes. I think one of the other big players in the PPP world in Kenya is Exim Bank from China. I think that is one of those that probably you should go and research and look out for and see which projects they are doing in Kenya. And that's why people keep saying, oh, we're also selling our country to the Chinese.
Anyway, I hope you have learned something on PPPs. If there are projects that you know that have been funded by PPPs, please tell us in the comment section. Tell us whether you think the cost of the project was worth it and the value that the country has derived from it.
Is worth it.
Is worth it.
Yeah.
Yes, so thank you for listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and watching us on YouTube. Please remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Okay? Yes. Until next time.
Bye.